Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. Thank you for being patient with us as we maneuver through our technical difficulties. Because we don't know whether or not the first attempt at this briefing was successfully recorded, we're going to start from the top. So we'll start with roll. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners Williams, Caston, Powers, Belzer, C. Williams, and Thomas. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioner Irvin. Attorney Moser, if you would please read the docket.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, commissioners, and to all who are present here today in person and virtually. Today is Thursday, February the 3rd, 2022. We are here in the Commission's hearing room pursuant to a notice of request for an allowable ex parte briefing from South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force, a task force of E4 Carolinas. The briefing is outlined in Commission Order Number 2021-725. The subject matter notice to be discussed today relates to the merger of E4 Carolinas and South Carolina Clean Energy Business Alliance, as well as the introduction of team members and activities of E4 Carolinas and the task force. This, I would remind everyone, is a briefing and not a hearing. The briefing must be conducted in compliance with the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260C, and the requirements of that statute are in part that the allowable ex parte briefing be confined to the subject matter which has been noticed. The South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force shall present information to the Commission at this allowable ex parte on the following items. First, an overview of the merger between E4 Carolinas and South Carolina Clean Energy Business Alliance, and second, an introduction of team members and various activities of E4 Carolinas and the task force. I would therefore ask the presenters, commissioners, and staff to please refrain from discussing any matters not related to the specific topic. The statute prohibits any presenter, commissioners, or commission staff from requesting or giving any commitment, any predetermination, or prediction regarding any action by any commissioner as to an ultimate issue which either is or is likely to come before the commission. I would also ask the presenters, the staff, and commissioners to refrain from referencing any report, article, statute, or document of any kind that is not included in today's presentation. A copy of any document which is referenced during the briefing must be provided to the Office of Regulatory Staff for inclusion into the record, which will be certified to the Chief Clerk of the Commission, Ms. Jocelyn Boyd. If anyone during the course of this briefing exceeds the scope or does not comply with or fails to conduct themselves within the provisions of South Carolina Code Section 58-3-260 governing allowable ex parte briefings, it is expected that a contemporaneous objection will be made. And finally, everyone in attendance today, in person or virtually, must sign in or register. Everyone in the hearing room or watching virtually must read, sign, and return the form which you were given at the door, or the form which will be emailed to you for your virtual appearance, which will include instructions and the deadline for its return. It is required by law for each attendee, whether attending virtually or in person, to certify that the requirements contained in Section 58-3-260C have been complied with in this presentation. Thank you all for your time and your attention. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Attorney Moser. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Commission. My name is Chris Huber, and I am General Counsel for the Office of Regulatory Staff, and I'm here today as the designee of ORS's Executive Director for today's allowable ex parte briefing. Thank you.
You're very welcome, Attorney Huber. Is that a promotion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, thank you.
Congratulations. All right, Ms. Loomis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Vice Chairman, Chairwoman. My name is Bonnie Loomis, and I am South Carolina Managing Director for E4 Carolinas, and we are extremely grateful to have the opportunity to be with you today in person ourselves and be with those who are joining virtually. I became a member of the E4 Carolinas team in July of 2020 when the South Carolina Clean Energy Business Alliance combined with E4 Carolinas. And part of that combination included the two co-chairs of our South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force. And I'm going to hand it over to Weston Adams, who is one of those two co-chairs, to introduce himself, our presenters, and his fellow co-chair. Again, we're very grateful to the commission staff, which has been very helpful in putting this together, and also to the Office of Regulatory Staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Loomis. Attorney Adams.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for having us here. Thank you to all of you. I practice law with Nelson Mullins, but today I'm really here in a slightly different context. As a board member of E4, I was the chairman of SCIBA before it was folded into E4, and so we've added this South Carolina component to E4, and Jeff and John will give you a bit more on that after I introduce them, and they'll give you sort of the mission and purpose of E4. They'll get into all the details on that. I'll just simply say that we are a two-state nonprofit headquartered in Charlotte, covering both South Carolina and North Carolina, and our mission, simply put, is to advance the energy economy writ large in the Carolinas. So that's kind of what we're about. So the leadership, Brian Stone, who is back here on the front row, and Brian, maybe you can wave to him, is my co-chair for the South Carolina Task Force of E4. Brian is the president of Lockhart Power. He also, for a time, concurrently ran NI America, the largest wastewater system in the state, had a dual job in that context, and now he's back to being the president of Lockhart Power alone. And Brian and I basically run the South Carolina Task Force for E4. Jeff Merrifield, immediately to my right here, is the global head of the energy practice at Pillsbury Winthrop Law Firm in Washington, D.C. Jeff previously served on the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. He was appointed to that commission by both President Clinton and President Bush, too. And Jeff lives in Davidson, North Carolina, and works up in Washington. And then to Jeff's right is John Morrison. John has a 40-year career in the energy industry. He is the president and CEO of E4. He just joined us about 3 weeks ago, and so is new in the saddle, but has more than a 40-year track record. He previously ran several solar developers, just has a long record. He also was the COO of Advanced Energy Corp and was a research associate at Harvard Business School. John has engineering degrees from Yale and Stanford and an MBA from Harvard Business School. And so this is an impressive bunch, the folks that I brought here to introduce to you. And sort of kind of what we're trying to do here is spread E4's wings and make it an effective nonprofit across two states, helping advance the energy economy here. I'm going to turn it over to our board chairman, Jeff Merrifield, and let him tell you the story.
Mr. Chairman, Madam Vice Chair, and members of the Commission, thank you very much for allowing us to come before you today to talk a little bit about E4 Carolinas and what we do. Before I launch into E4, just make a couple of notes to layer on top of what Weston has said. I come to you, obviously, as a former member of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. I am an alumnus of NARUC and continue to do a variety of activities with the Energy Committee. Particularly my role is the Pillsbury Law Pillsbury Law Chair of our practice. My specialty is nuclear law and all that goes along with it, and we are the oldest and largest nuclear law practice in the world. As it relates to that, I also bring greetings from David Wright, who's obviously a familiar member, former chairman of this commission, who is currently a member of the U.S. Nuclear Regulatory Commission. David was also a former board member on E4, so was very familiar with the activities and has frequently contributed to a number of the conferences that we've had since the time he was on the commission through now. I thought today what I would do in our presentation was begin a little bit by telling you a little bit of what we aren't, and then I'm going to go into what we are and the history of that. What we aren't part is we are not a lobbying organization. We are not a litigating organization. and we are not an organization that advocates for or against any piece of legislation. We're a 501c6. We are more educational in nature. We're a membership-based organization, and our focus for our group is workforce development, building the energy economies of South Carolina and North Carolina, and really working with economic developers to bring more companies in the energy arena to the two-state region. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the presentation. The genesis of E4 actually harkens back to the sort of mid to late 2000s. There was a predecessor entity called the Carolinas Nuclear Cluster. Much of that was located and based out of Fort Mill. It brought together a variety of nuclear-related companies in South Carolina, and really was the time when that was really burgeoning. Beginning in, I think, around the 2011 timeframe, there was a recognition that there was really something going on here in the two-state region as it relates to companies involved in supplying electricity, its components, and a workforce. As a result of that, a group of energy leaders led by Jim Rogers, who was then the CEO of Duke, came together and they kicked off a study undertaken by McKinsey, which looked at the two-state region. And the result of that was an identification that at that time there were approximately 250 companies employing about 25,000 workers who were in that energy mix, in that cluster. Based on that information and in that gathering, it was decided that we would initiate the creation of E4 Carolina as an energy association on behalf of the two-state region. And I and a group of others served as the initial board of E4 Carolina, and over the last 3 years, I have served as its chairman. That group, which grew from one staff member, and a handful of companies, today comprises a staff of, I believe, now 12. We have a substantial budget, and our membership is approaching 150 different companies. Now, I should say 150 different entities. In part, that is traditional utilities, and I'll walk through some of those traditional utilities, suppliers to the energy arena, but it also includes educational institutions and a variety of others. Going to the presentation, focusing on who we are, really goes to slide 3. We really encompass the full breadth of technologies in the region. So it is nuclear, renewables, traditional fossil energy, and a variety of emerging technologies. We don't have any fusion members yet. I do advise the Fusion Energy Association Washington on those matters. We certainly hope to get fusion members down the line. That's an area where, for example, Savannah River may have an important part. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, great, thank you. Educational institutions, University of South Carolina, South Carolina State, and Clemson are members, along with a group of other entities in North Carolina. Savannah River National Labs is a critical member of our team because the excellence that they bring in energy research, and we are, as we will talk in a little bit, continue to reach out to the capabilities that they bring. Utilities, we have virtually every major utility participant in the two-state region, including a variety of energy cooperatives. Manufacturing, which is critically important in the state of South Carolina, is a very important element of the work that we do, and I'll mention some of those companies going forward. In terms of initiatives, and I think this, as we walk through our presentation, I think this is what we'll be putting a significant amount of our efforts are to alternative fuel transportation, and that really takes the strength of the South Carolina automotive industry, combines that with the historic lithium and battery manufacturing capabilities that are existent in North Carolina, as well as some which are emerging, including Toyota, and really move that into the region. Hydrogen, and we'll talk in more detail about that later, is a significant economic driver, and one in which there is opportunities for significant transformation of the energy economy, and we certainly are working very hard on that one. Renewables, that is an area where this region has been a real leader, both in terms of solar. We see significant opportunities down the line for wind, and that is something that I think the two states will certainly be looking at as well. I'm not going to go into a significant amount of detail on this particular slide because obviously you know this better than we do. I would note on the energy consumption, which is the lower right-hand slide, many of the larger consumables of energy in South Carolina today are imported. Nuclear is obviously a component for which most of that generation comes from the state. Hydroelectric and biomass are important contributors as well. But we do see as the energy economy continues to grow, whether it is renewables, whether it is addition of hydrogen, or potentially advanced nuclear generation, which is an exciting topic, all of these could contribute to a greater share of that energy potentially coming from the state of South Carolina itself. I mentioned a little bit, we have 140 plus members, and as stated before, it is a mixture of utilities, companies that are in the service industry and manufacturing, universities and startups. We also have various non-government organizations which both advocate for various elements of energy, some which wouldn't necessarily be obvious. One of the things we are very proud of as an organization is that because we don't advocate before or against specific pieces of legislation or for specific rulemaking or other activities, we really provide a safe space for conversations about where the energy economy can go. It also gives us an opportunity to interact amongst our members and really try to grow business. That's on a business-to-business basis, as well as I mentioned, trying to bring more of the nation's and international nuclear economy into the two-state region. This gives you a sense of some of our large utility members, and as I mentioned, this isn't just the large integrated utilities, but we have a variety of cooperatives who play a very important part in our group. We have 24 members of our board, and there are several of members on that board that are represented from the cooperatives. So we want to make sure we have good diversity in that regard. Going to service providers, this runs the gamut. Some of these are companies which provide the parts and pieces for utilities or other power producers. Some of them are like the entities that West and I represent, which are law firms and other consultants who work on behalf of those very same partners. But it gives us a wide mix of elements. In the manufacturing and EPCs, this has historically been a very vital part of our group. Obviously, manufacturing drives significant job creation, and we are very much focused on the notion of trying to enhance the level of job creation in the two-state region. Westinghouse, for example, which has its international fuel operations not too far from here, is obviously one of the members who we've been trying to help expand those operations in other areas. Similarly, Siemens Energy, just across the border from Fort Mill in Charlotte, has had a major increase in the scope of its operation that was particularly dedicated toward combined cycle operations. They are now looking at expanding that potentially down the road to things like advanced nuclear, and we are certainly very supportive of those efforts as well. I would note on that slide, Honeywell, which is on the middle right, is a major energy producer that just within the last several years has decided to locate its international headquarters in Charlotte. So as we see continued movement in both South Carolina and North Carolina increasing their population and being increasingly seen as desirable places to locate, these also are big drivers for large international corporations which are able to attract the workforces to these regions. Others that I list here, Toshiba 8 Rivers, which is an entity which is developing some clean energy technologies, a variety of different companies out there, and we continually try to expand and build on that because we really do want to represent the entire energy economy. Educational institutions have always been a key element of the work that we do. Both as I mentioned, University of South Carolina and Clemson are members, along with their counterparts in North Carolina. I would note here too The Electric Power Research Institute, this is the large research entity on behalf of the electric generating industry, has one of its two major offices in the region. Actually, the largest footprint of EPRI is in the Charlotte region, and they provide an important role not only for the electric industry, but because of the global reach of their activities, really allows E4 to plug into a variety of different areas that we otherwise would not be able to do. I think here I would pause. One of the things that we found as an organization is because we are represented by so many international companies, and our board is representative of a wide variety of those same entities, we really are able to look at things in an international and national context that many state-based energy associations are not able to do so. I would also note, given our decision to bring SCIBA into the E4 fold, E4 now represents the largest energy association in the state of South Carolina, and certainly our goal is to try to continue to build on that, both for the South Carolina economy and for our membership. From a vision perspective, we really want to be an energy innovator. We want to attract companies. We want to enhance economic development. We have a variety of task forces, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then research and activities that we're doing, and this will be a conversation that John Morrison, our CEO, will talk about. There are some very interesting future growth areas for energy, all of which there is a strong connection with South Carolina and North Carolina, and we certainly want to help position our organization and our members to be leaders in that work. Finally, our task forces. We talked a little bit about the South Carolina Clean Energy Industries Task Force that Weston and Brian lead. That has become an important element of strengthening our activities here in the state. I would note we do have offices located both on the grounds of the University of South Carolina as well as at Clemson in Charleston, so we do have two offices here. We have historically focused significantly on workforce development. We have an excellent training program. The Office of Regulatory Staff uses that for training a number of their members in really an introductory way on the energy industry. We have a boot camp that we call it, and that has been an excellent relationship between the two entities and their counterparts in the state of North Carolina as well. We have a communications task force, a policy task force, and we do annual Washington fly-ins and update our members. That is an activity we've had significant interest and support by the two states. Very frequently we've had members of the North Carolina Public Utility Commission participate in that. We would certainly like to engineer that program in a way it would be comfortable for members of this commission to participate as well, but happy to talk about that in the question and answer period. Finally, I'll make one point and then turn it to John. Our real focus in the time that I have been chairman is really focusing on the issue of economic development. And we list there 4 key areas where we believe there's some real defining capabilities for the South and North Carolina region. The first being alternative fuel vehicles, the second being the green hydrogen economy, third being grid hardware and energy storage, and one which isn't listed there is advanced nuclear reactor technologies, where we really do believe the base we already have in that arena will allow this region to really take a leadership role, and I'll let John tease that one out some more. So with that, I'll turn it over to John Morrison, our chairman, our CEO and president. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you. Good morning. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate the opportunity to share with you about E4 Carolinas. If we can go back to the slides, thank you. In addition to the task force work that is organized by our members and led by various members of our board, we have a number of research activities. And as Jeff alluded to, most of them are research that's driving towards economic development, understanding the industry that we have here and the opportunities for growing the energy economy in both South and North Carolina. Most of these are federal grants that we've received to do that work. The first is one on alternative fuel vehicles. looking at resilience and storm response. The project basically is mapping alternative fuel resources around the state, both electric and other sources of fuel, so that in the event of an emergency, those folks who are coordinating the response know where the resources are and can direct responders to those resources. That project will be wrapping up later this year, and so we will be working with the various emergency response entities in both North Carolina and South Carolina to share that knowledge and information with them. The second project, again, funded from the Department of Energy, is an energy hardware cluster. This is an accelerator that works with small startup companies and basically helps them develop the business plans, funding, and necessary growth. So it's really an incubator to get small companies up and going, and that has recently just started. So we don't have any graduates yet of the program, but I think it's a very interesting collection of companies that are participating in that. The third area is a green hydrogen effort that we have going. The grant we'll be wrapping up this year, is to inventory all the green hydrogen activity that's occurring in both states, in South Carolina and North Carolina. Following on to that will be a really exciting opportunity, which is the Southeast Hydrogen Energy Alliance, an alliance of companies, Savannah Lab and others, to promote the development of the hydrogen economy. We had a call, I guess it was last week, in which we put together, had over 250 participants representing industries and associations and organizations from a 5-state region here. The intent of that is to go after some of the funding that's coming out of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. DOE has about $8 billion that they expect to be funding at least 4 and maybe as many as 8 hydrogen research hubs.
Mr. Morrison,
Yes.
I hate to interrupt you, sir, but if you could move your microphone
A little
closer to you.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
sir.
you. I appreciate that. Thank you. We will be going after putting together that proposal for DOE, and would hope to be able to put the Southeast in a very leading role in the hydrogen economy, something that we see as vital to where our energy industry is going.
Just to add briefly to that, that $8 billion is with the intention of having at least 4 hubs. More likely, it's going to be in the 6 to 8 region nationally for the hydrogen economy. And I think what we're seeing in the group that John and others have put together is this region is very well placed in things like transportation, whether it's roadways, the port facilities in the 2 states in particular, and some of the pipeline networks that are available, among other really key elements in building that out. So we think that's going to be a tremendous opportunity for the 2-state region and our counterparts in Virginia, Tennessee, and Georgia. And we'll be working hopefully to identify a large contract organization that is in the position to run a multi-billion-dollar contract, because we think from a resource standpoint, we've got a very appealable grouping of entities in that regard.
Yeah. So that's definitely one to stay tuned. The next slide is a grant that we're working on the advanced nuclear technology arena. This, like the hydrogen one, is basically an inventorying and tracking of what's happening in that industry, who the players are, what the projects that are coming down the pike. It really, and this one is for the Department of Commerce, it really is a case of the basic information that we need if we're going to do economic development. The Carolinas is historically strong in this. Jeff mentioned that the origins of this organization really was within a nuclear cluster. The reason for that is that we have probably the biggest cluster of companies involved in the nuclear industry here in North and South Carolina. I don't know if you've been following it, but there's a lot of exciting developments around small modular reactors. And that's a lot of what the work here is doing, and saying how do we grow that economy? How do we help the companies that are doing that and help move that technology forward? The last two grants that we have are slightly different. They're not federal grants. They come from other sources. The first is the Carolinas HBCU Energy Leadership Pathway. This is a grant that well, it's a program that we started with a volunteer advisory board in 2020. And it has now been funded with a grant from the Duke Energy Foundation, and piloting with 4 HBCU, historically black colleges and universities, 2 in South Carolina and 2 in North Carolina. 2 in South Carolina are South Carolina State University and Bennett College. The purpose and objective of that project is to introduce students at these schools to the energy industry and to encourage them to consider careers, and as they get into those careers, to then help them develop the necessary leadership skills to do that. It's a nice complement and with the leadership development that we already do in the industry. It is a case that the energy industry is not very diverse, which is why this program was started. It came about from some conversations that we had during one of the policy visits to DC several years ago in the office of Representative Clybourne, who basically asked, what are you doing with HBCUs in the energy arena, and sort of issued the challenge. And so Jeff was there at that and my predecessor, and they came back and said, we're going to put this program together. So assembled that advisory board and put it on. We just, the first of this month, 2 days ago, brought on board the director for that program. And so this spring, this semester, we will be interacting with students for the first time, enrolling them in that program, and look to have great results from that. The pilot is, as I said, with 4 schools. Our intention is to eventually expand that to all of the HBCUs in both North and South Carolina. The 2 states probably have more HBCUs than anywhere else in the nation. And eventually, we think we will have a model that we can expand elsewhere nationally as well. And as I said, the objective here is to really encourage students at these schools to go into the energy industry, an industry that hasn't really been well represented in that regard. And the last grant is a project that we're doing really around public education, helping people understand the energy industry, where our electricity comes from, and how our utilities operate. It was a project that we're doing on behalf of Duke Energy. Duke wanted a unbiased, party to present these and put these together, and serve as a real educational resource. That will be wrapping up. We'll be finishing that up this spring, and so probably this summer, second quarter in all likelihood, those will be going live and providing a resource for people who want to get more information about just where does their electricity come from, how do we indeed keep the lights on, and all that goes on behind that. Those are the research activities. You've heard task forces and the like. We certainly will welcome any questions or comments that you all have. And
Thank you, gentlemen, for presenting, and Ms. Loomis for being here with us today. A couple of things I want to say, and then I will open the floor to my colleagues. First, I want to thank you all for being responsive to Congressman Clyburn's question. Actions speak louder than words, and so I'm impressed that you all, not that you wouldn't, but it's just good to see a presentation where an initiative like the Carolinas HBCU Energy Leadership Pathway is already in the works and is up and running, as opposed to an aspiration. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. The next thing is a question. What, if anything, can the PSC do to bring more businesses to South Carolina?
Well, Mr. Chairman, let me take the first crack at that. First of all, thank you very much for the comment that you made. I was there when we had that meeting in Mr. Clyburn's office, and I have to say, when he asked the question, "What are you doing with the HBCUs?" I had to sheepishly say, at one point we had one of them as a member, and not all that much. And his, the question coming from that office was, you all have a problem with finding African Americans in your workforce, don't you? And the answer was yes. And what are you doing about it? So we made a commitment. We were going to, I didn't want to have to answer that question again, and and not be in a position to say we are actively engaged in trying to make a change there.
And Mr. Chairman, I'll just add, Jeff is being modest. That was entirely his idea, so he gets full credit for that.
The important part, and thank you, Weston, for that.
Absolutely.
The important part is we're able to take a framework of training we already have and work, and the leaders on this are really the leaders of those HBCU institutions. Come up with something that's going to work for them and where we can make a commitment to helping that occur. And it's going to help our members because we want to create, our members we have 40 members that are already signed up to this program because they want to be participants. There is a urgent need to have more individuals, African-American community, frankly, Hispanic community, and others involved in our workforce. And so we want something that's actionable. We want something that is deployable not only in the Carolinas, but our vision, and we've already had initial conversations with the Department of Energy and others, is for this really to be a model program for South Carolina and North Carolina to really lead the way nationally for creating that STEM-based pipeline for a more diverse energy workforce, and we want that to happen here first. So thank you for that, allowing us to say a little bit more about that question. In terms of what the PUC can do, I think we are very sensitive to the fact, because of the statutory requirements placed on the institution, you have a lot of limits in what you can do. The one area that I think we would love to see a way to make it work is to engender more of a conversation with you and your counterparts in North Carolina at some of our summits to talk a little bit about your role and your vision. Obviously, we want to do that in a way that is consistent with South Carolina law and comfortable with the attorneys with whom you work to make that happen. So I think that's an area where additional engagement there would be really helpful. I think to this kind of a discussion, we hope this isn't the last. We'd like to be in a position to come to you in the future, whether it's a year or 2 years from now, and update you in terms of the progress that we're making in terms of helping to build the South Carolina and North Carolina energy economy. And I think finally, we want to be a resource because we have an ability to tie in to significant information about the development of these advanced technologies, be they advanced nuclear, fusion, hydrogen, advanced forms of renewable energy. We have some very good understanding of where those are going and want to serve as a resource if that will help you in the decision making that you need to do. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Attorney Adams, did you have?
No, sir, Mr. Chairman. I think you covered it well.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Merrifield. I will say that it's not without good cause, but this is the most restrictive organization that I've ever been a part of. And so hopefully we can work together in some way, shape, or form to identify opportunities to have conversations that are congruent with the law. So thank you for acknowledging that.
Thank you.
Commissioners.
Mr. Chairman,
Commissioner Thomas.
thank you. I appreciate this. This has been very informative. I was looking at page 4, and on the right-hand side, there's the comment that says the world's most advanced wind turbine drive train testing facility. That just sounds interesting to me. I wondered if there's anything else that you can tell us about that.
Well, that is a facility that's in Charleston. It's on the Clemson campus. It is the most innovative facility available. One of the things which is noteworthy about it, because it's located adjacent to a large deep water port, very large wind turbine machinery can be brought in off the water, and of course, as you may know, offshore wind turbines are massive, 5 to 7 megawatt size facilities, so that the nacelle pods on those are very, very large. And they can be brought into that facility and tested by the team at Clemson. It is a world-class facility, one of which South Carolina should be very proud.
Okay.
I'm sure they would be more than happy to take you. I'm sure Clemson would be more than happy to take you on a tour of it.
And I would add, I think this is one area where South Carolina has a very distinct competitive advantage, which is in in the arena of offshore wind. The industry builds massive things, wind turbines, steel towers, the nacelles that Jeff referenced, all of which have to be transported by water. They can't be transported over land. They're just too big. And so with ports that South Carolina has and the manufacturing capabilities that South Carolina has, I think it's well positioned, not just for facilities located, generation facilities located in South Carolina waters, but up and down the entire East Coast and to the Gulf. These things are readily transported. Once you get it on barge, you can move it many places. And so I think this is an area that South Carolina, I think, has a very distinct advantage.
Yeah, I would just say, we hear a lot about a lot of solar panels coming in from China, but we're also, and I know you all are proud of the fact that South Carolina has lots and lots of BMWs that are being shipped to China. And so there is a real opportunity here for a large manufacturing base for the wind energy arena to be hosted here in South Carolina, some parts of North Carolina as well, and shipped, as John has mentioned, not just within the United States, but internationally. That is a real large economic opportunity for the state, and hopefully we can help assist in making that happen.
Okay. And so I had another question on page 14, the green hydrogen, and you get the map there with all of the little blue dots. Can you give me an idea of what the blue dots represent?
That is part of the inventory that this project has done in terms of identifying companies that are participating in the green hydrogen industry and the supply chain for that. And so this is a preliminary look at what exists here in the 5-state region. And again, as I mentioned, there are a lot of companies doing a lot of things here. It was eye-opening to me as we got into this project to understand exactly how much is going on here. But I think it positions the Southeast very, very well for one of these grants, and obviously then building the industry out as hydrogen becomes much more central to our energy story.
Let me add a little bit to that, and I think there's sort of two buckets that I talk about. The first one is a production standpoint. Today, the U.S. Department of Energy has given out a series of grants to a variety of U.S. nuclear utilities that are taking off-peak power and intend to generate hydrogen in their areas. These have been received by Arizona Public Service, Exelon based in Illinois, Xcel Energy in Minnesota, and there's also a project out in Ohio with First Energy. There are a number of other renewable companies that are looking at green energy as well. And green energy and hydrogen is really, from our lexicon, non-carbon-based generation of hydrogen. And so wind and solar, nuclear, hydro, all of which can produce that green hydrogen. What does it mean for the energy economy in the state? Well, one of the things that's being looked at very closely is the use of adding hydrogen in limited amounts, and this could be 10, 15%, into the existing natural gas pipeline network for either home consumption or use by industry for power production purposes. Many of the large turbine manufacturers, Siemens, GE, Alstom, among others, are looking at alternatives where you could have direct burn hydrogen for energy production. Hydrogen is also useful for things like marine transportation. This is very relevant, obviously, to South Carolina. There are test ships right now near shore. Hydrogen gets a little bit complicated because of the bulk size tanks you have to utilize it. So that hydrogen, direct hydrogen, is more of a near shore opportunity. We looked at this in a paper that Pillsbury conducted with Clean Air Task Force recently. An exciting area is actually ammonia. You can use the hydrogen and the molecules of the hydrogen to transform that into ammonia. Ammonia can actually be used as a dual fuel for long-range transportation, long-range marine carriers. So bulk cargo carriers, roll-on, roll-off systems such as this could be converted. And there are several companies in Europe that are building dual fuel large marine ships that can use both traditional bunker fuel as well as ammonia for having that propulsion. So there is a real opportunity here in South Carolina because of the port system to potentially link into that part of the hydrogen economy. So a lot of different areas that are developing, and a significant amount of government funding, as mentioned before, available to try to transform us to that green-based energy.
Okay. I have one more question, and this one relates to page 15. And you mentioned the small modular reactors. And I guess I had two questions along those lines. One, what's going on in South Carolina, or well, the Carolinas, as well as the other question that I have in my mind. And you started mentioning the ports, and personally, I've thought about the nuclear-powered submarines and ships and all of that stuff that used to go in and out of Charleston all the time. But is there any relationship to those sorts of reactors and anything that I don't know if it's being worked on, the small modular or whatever? I just don't even really know enough to ask the intelligent question, but that's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, let me jump on that one. In addition to the role I serve on E4, I also am on the board and chair the Advanced Reactor Task Force for something called the Nuclear Industry Council, which is one of the two largest nuclear entities in Washington. And I spend a lot of time on this topic. In fact, I've given 3 different presentations to various of the NARUC committees and subcommittees, particularly on electricity, to talk about advanced nuclear. I'm happy to come back at a later meeting and go into this in more depth if you're interested. I've done so for the state of North Carolina. But in sum, these reactors generally range from microreactors of about 1.5 megawatts to about the 300 megawatt size. And there are a variety of different designs using high temperature gas, molten salt, fast reactors. There is significant DOE funding, and when I say significant, it is in the billions of dollars that has been put into developing a variety of these technologies. There are initial plants that have been, for which funding has been received, to be placed in Wyoming. That would be TerraPower, and that is a facility that's actually transforming a former coal plant. X Energy, which is building a plant with Energy Northwest, and that is a high temperature gas reactor. And then NuScale, which is actually a smaller light water reactor, more akin to the current fleet of reactors that will be built by UAMPS up in Idaho. So there are a variety of technologies that are being assessed. There's been an announcement recently they're going to have a microreactor in place in Alaska. So a lot of things going on in the area, and one that I think this is worthy of the PUC being more aware of and following. From a maritime perspective, our fleet of carriers and submarines is made up totally of nuclear power plants. There are about 100 in the U.S. Navy fleet. The U.S. had the original we had the original small modular reactor. It actually powered McMurdo Sound in Antarctica for about 20 years. So this is really not that new. There are some folks looking at potentially barge-mounted small modular reactors, so there is a tie-in to some of that former U.S. Navy activity. So a lot of things going on, a lot more that I could say, but suffice to say, it's a very active area, significant bipartisan support in Washington for advanced nuclear, and would be happy to come back and brief you in more depth if you'd like.
And an example, here close to home, is one of the companies that's a member of E4 Carolinas, a startup that is looking at a very innovative technology to take waste fuel. You all know that we have quite a bit of it sitting in refueling pools and dry casks at many of the reactors here in the Carolinas, but taking that fuel and reprocessing it in a manner that makes it suitable for the molten salt reactors that are being in development. That particular company is applying for a grant from the Small Business Innovation Research funding, but they're going to use Savannah River to do that initial testing. They obviously have the facilities at the national lab there to do that. And so that's an example, I think, of some of the stuff that's here close to home, but also just some of the really innovative thinking that's occurring, taking what has been this waste and a problem to be dealt with and turning it into something that's of value and use.
Yeah, and I apologize. I missed that part of the question. John, thank you for adding there. We have several other developers, Kairos Power, which has a molten salt pebble bed reactor that where they've got an office in the region. Terrestrial Energy just located its international headquarters. That's a molten salt technology. That's going to be located in their international headquarters is located here in the region. NewScale, which is the first company to receive a license for its small modular reactor technologies from the NRC. They have an office in the region. So we are seeing a number of companies that are locating operations in the two-state region because they really want to tie into the ecosystem that we've created in this area, and we think this is an area of real potential growth.
Thank you, I appreciate that. That's all I had.
Commissioner Caston.
Actually, on that slide 15, I had a question too. You talk about creating a plan, the project. I guess this Commerce grant will create a plan. Is this primarily funding just a study to look into the private? Could you elaborate on that?
Certainly, yes. It's basically an effort to look at the supply chain and the industry that exists here. And so it is a study. We're not talking hardware. We're not talking building anything at this point. But it's sort of the foundational information that will let folks at the Department of Commerce, presumably folks at DOE and the like, get a better understanding of where the industry is, what the current assets are, and essentially who's doing what. Now, we also anticipate using it with our state departments of commerce and the local economic development boards to say, listen, you already have a network here as they're doing their recruiting of new industry that may be out talking to companies. We can help them make the introduction. Say, if you're talking to someone who has part of the supply chain for nuclear reactors, we can put them in touch with players that are here because we have that database, we have that information. So it really, that's why we focus on the economic development. It really is a case of this is fundamental information that allows us to make connections and help build the industry.
Yeah, this particular study does go beyond North and South Carolina. It is incorporative of Virginia, Tennessee, and Georgia. But it also focuses on the notion that this, in order to really enable these advanced reactor technologies to be deployed, we're going to need to bring in more supply participants and really build and rebuild that network to have the capability for producing the components and technologies needed to advance these designs. Having this inventory is going to make it very helpful for whether it's the South Carolina Department of Commerce or others to approach those technology developers and say, you want to build your reactor design, let's explain to you the capabilities and resources and support we have here in South Carolina to really enable your technologies to move forward quickly. So it's going to be a great, it's an inventory that has a multiplicity of purposes, but from a state standpoint, focusing on South Carolina, it will really provide a tool for the state to be a more effective advocate of why companies should be located here in pursuing these technologies.
And I'll just add, this afternoon, we're going to sit down with the folks at Commerce to share that with them.
Well, you answered all the questions before I could answer them, so thank you very much for your presentation.
Commissioner Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of y'all for being here today. The rapid change that's happening with electric vehicles and as that relates to your outreach program, what are the challenges you see, particularly in the rural areas, in both the idea of electric vehicles, the practicality and charging stations and all that? Is that something that's part of some of your work or discussions?
It's an issue. I don't know that we've gotten into that specificity in terms of that, But as we look at alternative fuel vehicles, and we use that term to be a lot more encompassing of the wide variety of alternatives that we have that can be lower carbon in terms of vehicles. Electricity, I think, is an important one that obviously works in areas where you have sufficient density and have the infrastructure for charging. In rural areas, I would hazard a guess that what we're going to see is other forms of alternative fuels, be they, in all likelihood, hydrogen-based. Jeff mentioned ammonia is one way to do it. Those of you that are familiar with farming, you know that farmers routinely handle and use ammonia as part of their fertilizing practices. And so it's a technology that I think is very familiar to them. The other area is in heavy-duty vehicles as well. That probably won't be electric. There's just too much energy that's needed to do that. And so some of these other alternatives that we're looking at, I think will come to play there. I hope we don't fall into the trap of saying it's going to be all electric and only electric. That won't serve all of our needs.
Yeah, I fully agree with John's comment on that. I would note, and we don't have the answer to this yet. I think a lot of that is currently in process, and so we don't know. None of us knows at this point what's going to happen with Congress and what element of an infrastructure bill could or may get through. I would say one piece that does have strong bipartisan support, including Senator Manchin of West Virginia, is the clean energy piece, and that does incorporate within it a significant amount of money for charging stations and building up some of that electric vehicle infrastructure. I think from our standpoint, the two states should get their fair share of that money. Certainly would do anything on our part to help the delegation in that regard. And I think that all plays into a variety of the different work that we've described today, where we know there are a variety of businesses in the two states which are part of that network in terms of the equipment, in terms of the batteries, in terms of the hydrogen, in terms of the vehicle manufacturing. We want to make sure that we're bringing all of those together under our umbrella and really enable a maximum utilization of these technologies within economic and other sensibilities in a way that will help get us to a cleaner economy, but done so in a way that's not overly expensive for the users who ultimately have to drive those vehicles.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Absolutely, sir. Are there any more questions for the panel?
Chairman
Commissioner Williams, you have the floor, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here. This has been fascinating, and I think you've opened some doors and you've reaffirmed some information that we may have known, and so I really appreciate it. My first question has to do with your membership, and one of the logos that I saw made me wonder, why Southern Company?
That's a good question. Southern Company, and I'm forgetting, and John will help me with this. Southern Company,
and it really is Southern Power. So maybe I've mixed up who we're talking about.
Southern, and I forget. I think it's Southern Power purchased a entity in the Research Triangle area that was involved in supply of various components to the energy industry, and that was the original nexus behind that membership. It's also reflected that Southern is an important provider of energy in the state of North Carolina. They have an open market subsidiary that operates a large combined cycle unit in Statesville, North Carolina, which is north of Charlotte. My company is Energy United, which is one of our members. Energy United receives the majority of their power from that combined cycle unit. So in my personal instance, Southern is supplying the power to my house. So it was a natural nexus, and I think an extension of the fact that we are looking beyond just the borders of the two states in terms of trying to build relationships. A river doesn't define an area, and obviously the things that happen across the Savannah River also impact this two-state region as well. So we very much were embracing, as were they, in being part of our network. We hope Tennessee Valley Authority thinks similarly, and we'll be having them join at some point, hopefully as well.
Nice. Glad I asked. on page 14, where you talk about the resilience for alternative fuel vehicles, and I think you mentioned that that grant work was coming to conclusion. And would you talk some more about that mapping effort and who might be able to use it from a resilience perspective? I think it ties in a little bit to Commissioner Powers' question in terms of rural areas, but just curious what we might get at this stage in terms of information. Not we, as in the Public Service Commission, just the community.
The community, and actually, it will be with a lot of the disaster response agencies in both
Okay.
states. That's the intent of this project. It was a 3-year project. We're now in the third budget year for that project, and the tasks that remain to be done are to take the data and information that's been compiled, provide it to those various entities. We'll be pulling some workshops together. We'll actually be running some, sort of test emergencies, to make sure that they understand how to access the information, how to get it. So it involves the utilities, because obviously in a lot of storm response activity, fire departments, all the first responders, public safety and the like. So at this point, we haven't schedule those workshops, and so I'm not sure who's actually going to respond to our invitation, participate, but that's who the audience is for it.
Yeah, I would note, 3 years ago, we hadn't received any grants. This has been a major area of focus in our economic reach. And we were able to receive that one in no small part because of the importance that resiliency has to the two states and the degree to which we are affected by large storms, particularly hurricanes. And so this was really seen as an effort to build out and build in more of that resilience into the system and accommodate the fact that we do see a growing infrastructure of alternative fuel vehicles, including but not limited to electric vehicles.
Will gaps be identified and recommendations for what we might do going forward?
Certainly the tool that we're developing will be very easy to see those gaps. The deliverables that we have for the project don't include those recommendations. My guess is, excuse me, that the entities that we share the information with may then choose to figure out how to fill those gaps.
Well, yes, we're going to be basically providing the data that shows the existing framework. It may be, there's always a potential for follow-on activities that we could do as an organization that would say, how would one go about filling some of those gaps? So you make an excellent point. That's certainly something we're looking at.
And finally, there has been a lot of discussion. I think Chairman Williams may have kicked it off, and you all may, with his question about what we can do, but you've also identified a connection with NARUC. And so I really just want to tell you that NARUC is looking at doing an innovation webinar coming up this year, and that is a way that we can communicate without outside of this kind of environment. And they reached out asking about actually the wind simulator, and so it could be a nice synergy. Thank you for the good work that you do with regard to, kind of looking out for commercial opportunities in this state. Appreciate your being here.
Thank you very
No
much.
further questions.
Thank you, Commissioner Williams. Colleagues, any more questions for the panel? All right, anything from the Office of Regulatory Staff?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Irvin, do you have questions, sir? Commissioner Irvin, I believe you're muted. You're still muted, sir.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, sir. Please
Thank you,
proceed.
Mr.
You have
Chair.
the floor.
Thank you. Let me thank the panel for this informative presentation today. It's been most helpful. One of the things that we are facing as a Public Service Commission in South Carolina is to deal with getting our arms around the myriad technological advances in the area of power production, distribution, storage, generation. There's so many important issues that are going to be coming before us. And I see you all as a resource, a very exciting resource that you can advise the commission. I hope that you will be intervening in some of these proceedings because, as you know, we are very limited, as the chairman said, because of we're subject to the Code of Judicial Conduct. We cannot have ex parte communications. We can't pick up the phone and give you a call, nor can you contact us. We can't email you, nor can you email us. And we can't do site visits. As much as we'd like to see that Clemson facility down on the coast is looking at wind, we're not allowed to do site visits. So I think that the best role that I could see for your participation would be to actively intervene in dockets that you think you can provide some technical assistance, particularly as it comes to expert testimony, because we are limited on our small staff due to budget constraints and the salary that it would take to hire a nuclear engineer. We can't hire one at state employee rates. We won't be able to. So we're left with a knowledge gap, and I see you as well suited to step in and help us and help the people of South Carolina and the business industry in our state to try to better inform the decisions that we're going to be called upon to make. And I'll just speak a couple of areas that I'm concerned about. We hear so much about grid resilience. We hear so much about how do we best prepare for extreme weather events. Obviously, that's become an issue. We've seen recent examples in Texas where the whole grid, ERCOT, collapsed, and they're still trying to figure it out. And they say they're ready for the next extreme weather event, but I'm not so sure they are. We also saw a terrible hurricane hit the Louisiana coast and wipe out all the transmission lines that fed New Orleans. One of them actually the tower fell into the Mississippi River. And it's taken months to try to restore transmission lines. How can we plan in advance so that we're not victimized in South Carolina and North Carolina as we have these extreme weather events? How can we harden the grid? What's the best practice in terms of resiliency planning? I commend the Office of Regulatory Staff for their recent report that we just received this past week, which deals with some of these issues. They hired Guidehouse, a very highly respected investigative firm, and they took a look at all of the utilities in our state, and I commend that study to you if you've not reviewed it yet. But there are gaps when it comes to smaller utilities. So how can we, as a Public Service Commission, follow up with the Office of Regulatory Staff to see that these smaller utilities like water companies, sewer companies that are serving rural areas in our state, how can we bring them up to speed on resiliency? I don't know the answers, but this is going to be one of the things that we're confronted with immediately in terms of how best do we incorporate these planning and execution when you're dealing with entities that cross state lines. We understand that that our investor-owned utilities don't just operate in South Carolina, so there has to be some regional planning. I hope that you can fill that need because we can't always know what the North Carolina Utilities Commission is doing. Try to stay abreast of it, but you can be there and you can perhaps report back, give us kind of an idea of what the plan is. And I know the investor-owned utilities want to do that as well. And we respect that and look forward to that input. Finally, I want to say we are so proud to have one of our former South Carolina Public Service Commission chairman serving our entire nation as chair of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. So David Wright, I want to commend you. We are so proud of the work that you're doing in Washington, D.C. I'm hearing great things about your work. And I've got a request. I'm not going to go into the specifics because I don't want to ex parte you, but I will tell you that I had asked Duke Energy to consider reapplying to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for an extension of their license, which is about to expire in the next 10 years, as I recall. And I'm hopeful that not just with the facility at Oconee Nuclear, but all facilities that the NRC will consider where appropriate and where safety standards can be met and established, that we extend the life of these facilities that have served us so well for so many years. You know, if you're looking, just look at what happened in our state, a great safety record by Duke, a great employer that has served us so well over the years. And we need to keep that facility open and operational to the extent that we can. And I would encourage you at the appropriate time to look at that issue because we need alternative sources of power generation that don't depend on solar or wind. And part of that is going to have to be nuclear. And I think that, unfortunately, some countries in Western Europe have written off the nuclear industry and chosen to close those plants. And that's a big mistake because extending the life, I think, of those facilities where they can be extended to meet safety requirements is imperative to a clean energy future for not just South Carolina, but for our entire nation. Finally, I want to ask you, I know that you're looking in North Carolina, and I know that North Carolina currently is expanding their charging stations, not just to the cities, but to rural areas. And they're doing it through state grant programs. So I hope you're going to look at that because so many auto manufacturers in this country have made a substantial commitment to electric vehicles, and it's coming, and we've got to be prepared for it. And I don't know how we begin to build out a charging infrastructure in South Carolina, but we need a plan. So I hope that perhaps that's going to be a part of your research to come up with a plan that will serve our needs, not just residential needs, but the private sector needs of industry and commerce around the state, and get that charging network in place as soon as possible. If you'd like to comment on that, I'd look forward to hearing your response. And again, thank you for your presentation today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I'll just give one comment and then turn it over to Jeff and John. Commissioner Irvin raises a bunch of great questions that I think Jeff and John can best answer. I will just note on the intervention question that we are barred by our tax status. We're a 501c6, so unfortunately we can't intervene. But I think the alternative to that is us to do what we're doing today. I mean, we could do an annual briefing. We can come as often as we can come every 2 years, every year, whatever you want us to do. That's the workaround where we could really probably be useful to you in this setting if y'all have found this productive. So unfortunately, we can't intervene, but we can do what we're doing here today. So Jeff, you had a thought about the resiliency and some of the other stuff.
Yeah, I would say two things on that last thought. I mentioned this. We can also provide sort of targeted information if there are areas in which you'd like to have additional information. I mentioned a briefing that I provide on advanced nuclear. We obviously are doing a lot of hydrogen work. We could have a more tailored program to provide you more information about what's going on there. Alternative energies. There's any number of areas where we have the resources in a format like this, open to the public, to give you a briefing on areas that would be of interest to the commission and enhance your ability to make the decisions you need to make. I would say on a comment, I want to follow up on my good friend David Wright. We're all very proud of the work that he's done. He has jumped into his role as a commissioner of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission with both feet. He is very well liked, is really making a difference, and I am pleased to say, like many of you, he is my friend, and I'm doing all I can to help him in that role and be successful. As it relates to the existing fleet of nuclear power plants, there are 94 operating nuclear power plants in the U.S. All of them at this point have pretty much received an extension on their original 40-year licenses to allow them to operate for 60 years. The commissioner mentioned a further opportunity for an additional extension of 20 years that would allow those to operate for a total of 80. Those reviews are currently underway. From my personal standpoint, knowing those plants, and I visited all of them, every plant in South Carolina and North Carolina is in a position to be relicensed. They are operated very safely as a fleet. And certainly I would encourage that for the continued stability of clean energy generation in the Carolinas. I would note the NRC is making initial discussions about the potential for a further extension that would allow those facilities to be used for 100 years. I think that is technologically feasible. And frankly, these facilities look a lot different than they did when they were first built. I think that's, I would certainly commend the utilities writ large for the investments that have been made to keep those facilities up to date, safe, and put them in a position for those extended operations for the states in which they serve. With that, John, did you have anything else you want to
I'll just respond to the question about the charging infrastructure. I don't think it's the place or the role for E4s to create the plan for that. However, what we can do, and it's demonstrated in some of this research, is we can pull together the basic information that will help whoever the deciders, the decision makers, the plan creators are, to make a full and robust and useful plan out of that. Because of the contacts we have, because of the staff that we have to collect that information, I think we can be that source for doing that kind of work.
Very good. Well, I appreciate those responses. And again, thank you so much. And thanks for the clarification on your status as a potential intervener, where I understand. And I think that perhaps, Mr. Chairman, our staff, our technical staff, could begin a process of thinking about how we could do this on a regular basis, because it's been most informative. And I'd like to see us do a semi-annual, if maybe not even, we could even do a quarterly ex parte with these folks, because we learn so much when we hear these developments, and we have, you all have a wealth of research available to you that we do not. And so somehow we've got to keep those lines of communication open. And so I'm going to challenge our staff to work with your staff and ORS to figure out a way to do it that serves the public interest and also commerce and industry in the Carolinas. And thank you again for coming today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for those comments. Let me just reiterate something, and this is something that the ORS staff is currently doing, but there's, I think, every reason for the commission staff to attend some of the workshops and leadership training that we do. Jeff mentioned the boot camp, but we also have some more in-depth training that goes over 6 sessions over the course of a year that help individuals understand the energy industry in our region. So that's certainly open to staff, and we'd have to have
we are proud of our chairman, Justin Williams. He's participating in Leadership South Carolina right now. And he's using his annual leave to go to some of those sessions. And, you know, there's tremendous leadership on this commission. I'm so impressed with the new members that have come on, and they brought so much to the table. So, you know, if we can do a leadership boot camp within the rules of engagement, so to speak, without violating any codes of conduct or statutory provisions, I welcome that. And maybe we could have that in-house, you know, impose on you to bring it to us, and we can, you know, we can do it live and make it transparent. I think it would be a great thing because, again, we want to do the long-term planning, but right now, honestly, we're limited in our resources. And so I see this as a great opportunity for the commission to expand its knowledge as it relates to all these challenges. Thank you again for coming. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Irvin. Commissioner Irvin? I'm sorry, Commissioner Caston.
Not to drag this on any longer, but I would be remiss, since I've heard former Representative David Wright and former Commissioner David Wright. He was also a former Clemson graduate and also a former trackster at Clemson, which is where I really first met David. I consider him not just a good man, but a good friend. And I'll say this for the record, that if we had to run anything probably over 600 yards, I'll say 400 meters, he's probably going to beat me and beat me unmercifully. But if it was 400 yards or shorter, he didn't stand a chance. So pass that on to him and tell him I said hello.
I will. Thank you very much.
All right, if there's nothing else, we are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.